So we have all this on a YouTube channel for all these. So we have Boston and Cambridge, New York, Toronto, San Francisco, and then later in the year we'll start with Montreal and Seattle. Yep?
Who's we?
So there's a group of us that are in San Francisco, we've got a couple people. In New York, we've got a couple people. And then there's always the royal we, which there's a lot of shoe leather in this. I think there's a real need for this, and this is the 4th or 5th meetup that I've created. Most of them were in New York. This one actually started in San Francisco, because again, I'd seen a lot of model-heavy and theory-heavy meetups and discussions, especially there. TensorFlow is doing something every other day, it seems like. But I didn't hear people talking about the reality of connecting an API to something and making it work, which I think there's a lot of value in. Bless you. So yeah, we started it in San Fran, and I'd been doing something that was a little more AI and VR, and that didn't run out of gas. I thought we could do more in New York, and then again, I'm in Boston a lot anyway, so I thought let's be here. To that point, because this is the beginning, I'm actively looking for AI projects and companies who are interested in talking about their go-to-market kind of journey. And again, the point is, this is what it took for us to take the API that we're using, or for us to build a model, or for us to fully deploy something. The reality of taking something all the way to market. Great example is in San Francisco, we had somebody talk about a transcription product he has. So they'll do video transcription for longer videos. And they went through a search process of basically everyone's API, including some that I hadn't heard of, and settled in on, it happened to be Google. But the point was, hearing about the reality of what it was like for them to make that product go from an idea and a demo all the way to something they can deploy commercially is really valuable. And that's where I think a lot of people are, is we've done good demos, we've made something that works, in a limited sense, but how are we dealing with edge cases, and how are we dealing with the reality of production? So you'll hear a lot about that. That said, today especially, we'll start talking a little bit about voice interfaces, especially the ones that are commercially available as APIs. And we'll go through Dialogflow specifically. Has everyone here heard of Dialogflow? If not, you have now. And hopefully some of you brought computers. We have time at the end to go through and build a quick chatbot if you're interested in it. There we go. Oh, sorry. So today we're going to, we're hosted by McCarter & English, who are one of the biggest law firms on the East Coast. They're going to talk a little bit more about how amazing they are. But also, one of the things about the practical reality of making AI work is intellectual property. So they're going to talk a little bit about that and just cover some ideas. Then I'll go into user interfaces, and we'll go through a practical example. So I'll demo for you our product that does something I think that's pretty cool. And we'll go into, from that, if there's time and there's interest, we'll go through and create a quick chatbot in Dialogflow. There's some things about how Dialogflow handles context and handles conversation. There's pizza. Enjoy. There's things that I think are kind of cool that are easy for us to just kind of grab real quickly. So with that, if you guys have time when you're done with your pizza, pull out your computer and go to dialogflow.com and sign in. It shouldn't take too long, especially if you have a Gmail account. And if you're not up for it tonight, don't sweat it. It'll be pretty lightweight. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to David from McCarter & English. He'll talk just a minute. So thank you guys for having us, and here you go.
Thank you.
There you go.
So good evening and welcome everybody. I'm David Burns from McCarter & English.
So you can just use that to advance it.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, just by a show of hands, I just wonder how many people have heard of McCarter & English? Okay, a couple. And just out of curiosity, how many people here are here from academia? You're a student? Okay. You work for a startup? You work for a big company? Okay. Good, thank you. So, how many people think they can get a patent for an AI application? Wow, that's not good. That's bad news. You're all wrong. And let me just start by saying, got it? Okay, So just a little background about McCarter English. We're a 400 attorney firm. We're a general practice firm. We cover almost every aspect of law that you can think of or that you would need as a startup. We have offices that extend up and down the Bosch-Wash corridor from Boston all the way down to DC. We have IP in every office. We've been around for a long time, 170 years. And we're based on a practice group model. And I sit in two different practice groups, the IP practice group, as well as the venture capital and emerging growth practice group with my partner, Ben Rung. The venture capital and emerging growth practice group is made up of a group of attorneys that specialize in working with startups, and they have different backgrounds. Myself being IP from the high-tech software side, Ben being corporate. We have real estate, we have immigration attorneys, we have real estate attorneys that help with that first lease if need be. Just to give you a sense of where McCarter stands in the venture capital emerging growth arena, according to PitchBook, we have a significant presence as a top 10 law firm. Excuse me. We're ranked 9th globally, 8th in the US, 3rd in the Mid-Atlantic, 8th globally in software transactions, and tied for 6th in global early stage transactions. So we do have some chops, we do have some experience in this arena. About myself, I've been practicing IP for 19 years. Prior to that, I was an electrical engineer for Raytheon for almost 13 years. I've led multiple attorney teams, building patent portfolios for a number of different technology areas. And I have been protecting AI inventions for 9 years. The first client that I worked for in this area is Huffington Post. It was pretty interesting. They use AI to figure out when they should post an ad or when they should not post an ad. They had a big concern at that time about posting an ad, for example, in their travel section relating to travel insurance, and at the same time they were posting an article about an airplane crash. So, they could see their advertisers would not be too happy about being related on the same web page with a bad news article. So they've implemented an AI system to identify, based on the article and content of the ad, what would be a good match for their advertisers, what would be a bad match, and then place the good matches in the spots that they should be placed. The other purpose that they started out using AI for is for categorizing and moderating user-generated content, i.e. a blog. And so what they were trying to figure out is, in blog comments, whether somebody was saying, "You're killing me," was an actual threat, or that was more of a praise or humor or something along those lines. So I worked on those two applications. I think out of that application, they've been granted maybe 5 patents in total for that technology. In addition to Huffington Post, I work with MIT for autonomous vehicles, cybersecurity, a Fortune 300 defense contractor for security-related AI. We just started working with a new startup by the name of Lania for document review. Purpose of their AI is to take a look at a legal contract, pick out the favorable clauses for the person, the entity, identify the unfavorable clauses in the terms, and make some suggestions for how you can kind of mediate those unfavorable terms in your favor. And since we're doing a voice aspect tonight, has anybody heard of Bolingo? All right.
Heard of it, but I can't remember what it is.
Well, Valingo was probably the first company in the US that had a voice-to-text app on a mobile platform. And they made the mistake of taking some capital from Nuance. And Nuance didn't see the mobile platform growing as quickly as it did, and they were still based on Dragon, on a desktop. And what happened is the mobile platform took off, and so they ended up suing them. So Nuance ended up suing Valingo for patent infringement. And I became a patent expert for Valingo in that contested matter. If we're talking about entrepreneurship, the lesson learned from there is if you're going to take capital from a company that has patents, you need to make sure you get a cross-license to all those patents as part of that package. Valingo didn't do that, and that's
Interesting.
yeah.
Especially when we're thinking about strategic investors.
Right. Just a little bit more background on AI. There's a recent Forbes article that came out that states that the AI market will grow from 8 billion in 2016 to more than 47 billion in 2020. So this is about where I started working on AI applications. You can see that the USPTO has seen a 500% increase in the number of applications filed in the past 5 years within this class 706, which is the class that handles all AI applications. If you take a look at the numbers, in 2004 there were 58 applications filed, not a lot. In 2011, there's maybe 4 times that, 197. And in 2016, there were 594. So as you can see, the number of applications, patent applications have grown. I think it's there's a correlation between the number of actual applications that we see. If anybody, I don't think anybody's working with a patent attorney right now since nobody has any patents, but regardless of who you work with, if the patent attorneys don't ask you these 2 important questions here, you need to find a new patent attorney. So if your patent attorneys are not asking you to identify the technical solution and the technical problem that your AI application solves or your algorithm solves, then they don't understand how to patent software. Same with how to identify how AI improves the performance of whatever computing device that you may be working on. Also, once you file the patent application, what you should do is try to determine what we call whether you have freedom to operate. In other words, you've put the money, invested your money into filing an application, but the next steps would be to determine whether potentially you might be infringing somebody else's IP.
You can just press the arrow key on the keyboard if it's easier.
Yeah, it's not working. As part of that, and part of that analysis would be who else has IP in your space. You got it? Thank you. And Ben can speak tomorrow a little bit about this. Another concern we have once you file a patent application is, have you secured assignments from each of your inventors? And do you have an employee agreement that automatically assigns all inventions to your company? Something to think about when you're adding personnel as a startup, and Ben can talk more about this, but it's essential to make sure that you lock up all the IP in the company as people join with service agreements. All the founders and other personnel should agree to assign any existing and to-be-developed IP relevant to the business. There'll be different forms for consultants versus employees, but the key is that both of them require confidentiality, that they assign all inventions and other IP to the company, and preferably that contains a non-compete, non-solicit, and non-disparagement clauses. Those can be a little bit tricky depending on states, but we would be here to work with you on that. And if anybody who needs to form as a company, we have a formation package. Ben, you want to say a little bit about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a flat fee package that basically includes the documents that typically are used to start an early stage company. So the flat fee includes not just the documents themselves, but the consultation around, how to sort of structure some basic stuff, equity structures and cap tables, option plans, cap tables, stuff like that. So, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it in more detail, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, it's a $1,500 upfront fee. It carries you for 6 months. The remainder $1,500 is due at the end of 6 months, and then you switch to
Typical
hourly or fixed fee rates.
depending on.
Right.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. If you have any questions, I'll be here.
Awesome. All right. So, forgive me, again, it's the first time that we've done this meetup, so there's probably a range of what people know and what people are familiar with. I'll move forward kind of quickly, stop me along the way. There's a reason why I focused on voice first, and we'll get into some of that later, but right now I'd say is the ability to use voice smoothly, I think, promises to change how we interact with everything. Star Trek obviously knew this years ago. It's, I think it's somebody, Stanford professor was saying, it's the most fundamental means of human communication. And I think that a lot of us got a little disappointed by how Siri started, kind of how Siri launched. Alexa took a little while to get good. Last year, a number of things happened that are really important that we'll get into more, but the point being is that 2019, we're kind of poised to see some really interesting things happen with voice. The quality of it, the utility of it, and the usability of it are all, I think, going to really take a big leap forward. Some of that I'll cover in a minute. I kind of started saying this. 2018 was a good year. We've all familiar, I think, with off-the-shelf chatbots, most of which have a speech-to-text API. So obviously, I'm a little partial to Dialogflow. I think that from a usability and a quality standpoint, it's great. Amazon Lex is very good as well. Anybody here make a Alexa skill? Oh, wow. Awesome. Good room. Microsoft Lewis, I actually don't know very many people that have used this, but it's pretty good. And then Watson is you hear about it a lot, and I know some people that have made products with it. From a playing around standpoint, it started off a little bit more difficult, but it does some pretty good stuff too. So what happened in 2018? So you guys are all familiar with ImageNet? Have you ever heard about the ImageNet? So that's the idea that's kind of the watershed moment for deep learning, that ImageNet was a competition at Stanford, and people were doing well, and then deep learning came from a team from University of Toronto came and they kind of knocked it out of the park, and then everybody was using deep learning, and then they had to change ImageNet because it got so good. The point being is that they got to a place with images where you could do transfer learning, and that was, until last year, that was really hard to do with NLP. And at the end, we get to a place where BERT is the latest one. So anybody here hear about Google's BERT? So if you have a spare minute, I would look this up. In fact, there's a guy named Siraj Raval who anybody here? Sorry to keep doing this. Everyone here hear about Siraj Raval? Okay, so as you're curious about different things in AI, he does 5 to 10. Some of them are longer, but most of them are 5 to 10 minute videos that are fantastic. He's got a thing called School of AI, which is really good, especially if you want to look at it at a code level, which I'm going to tend not to do. The point being is that what finally happened was a series of papers got them to a place where you now have with Google's BERT the ability to train a model. It's a general, very powerful NLP model where you can train the top layer for your specific domain. So the thing you care about, you can train it on, but below that, it has the ability to classify and manage language in a way that nothing's been able to do so far. So and it's just happened. This happened at the end of October. So I think what you're going to see is, via that and some other things that have happened, this year there's just a lot of foundation that's been laid that I think you're going to see more and more. We're using some of this now, so I'm kind of talking about it myself. One of the ways of thinking about what that means, and again, some of you are going to get this and some of it may be a little bit new, is the idea of, and this, I'm using image here because it's so much more intuitive for us. But if you think about how deep learning works, where you start with fundamental images or fundamental like pixels, then it gets to edges and it gets to object parts, and then it's what the object is. So if you think about that in terms of language, what you're saying at the top is this is your final classifier. You're training it on the things that you care about. But under it is a model that is more general. Does that make sense? And that's sort of the promise of BERT. And what you're hearing about is different ways of fine-tuning the model. There's actually someone out of MIT, Catherine Havasi, who has a thing called ConceptNet, which is a really good way of fine-tuning this. So if you're interested in looking into BERT and fine-tuning, I would check out ConceptNet because it's pretty powerful. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing? Will?
So I'd like to leave intuitions here. What transfer learning means is you don't walk into your podium. We just saw how deep learning works in layers. Each layer in a deep learning model is successively more complex. That's kind of why I put that up there. For imagery, we can understand what that means. We train the model up to the last layer, then you tell it what you want it to be classifying. So one big sophisticated model can be reused for almost any kind of image. They already have it up on TensorFlow. So you can go in and play with it via the TensorFlow interface, which is great. It means the learning curve is a lot faster than it otherwise might. Anybody here play with TensorFlow? I thought that would be true. Awesome. Okay. Not, as I say, finally we can do that with language. So we're looking at a lot of this stuff sort of mattering. So 2019, I think you're already seeing it's going to be a big year for voice. There's a lot of momentum coming out of last year. Going from these canned voice solutions to smarter, more sophisticated ones. Things that can do text classification in a more sophisticated way. Things that can talk back and forth in a much more sophisticated way. And what we're about to look at with Dialogflow, and all of them are like this right now, is it's very call and response, which can still be pretty powerful, but it winds up being less of a technical thing and more of a content thing. Does that make sense? So in other words, you're writing scripts assuming that you've constrained it somehow so it'll seem natural. And I'll show you how they do that in Dialogflow in a minute. But the idea of being able to have the biggest issue we have with AI generally, I'm sure a lot of you have heard, is the narrowness of the models. They do magical things inside the little corridor you've trained them for, but as soon as you need context beyond what you trained them for, they have no idea. And you see this with language all the time, right? Is that you've trained it on how to react to certain things, but as soon as you say something that was outside of what you trained it on, it has nowhere to go. It has no context, no pun intended. So what you wind up doing with especially voice, but chat as well, is either creating the same utterance over and over again in different contexts, or you just mess around and have to write and execute around the limits of what the models can do. And the point being is that now we're looking at models that are more general, more sophisticated, and can understand a little bit more of the context. And I think over the course of this year, they're going to get better and better at that. Bixby says that they can do that now, and I honestly think there's something cool there. I don't understand it yet. They just launched that also in October. So you guys are familiar with Bixby? Bixby's Samsung, yeah. And they bought the company Viv Labs. That was the same team that built Siri, and they're legitimately pretty awesome. So what they've executed and how they do it is pretty new, and that right now, this year you're going to be hearing more and more about what they're doing, which is great. I keep doing this. I get ahead of myself a little bit here. So everything I just said, they were bought by Samsung in a couple years ago. Opened it to developers literally in October. So you can go to I think they call it Bixby Studio, and it's pretty cool. It's not as code free as some of the other things. You do have to have some. I believe JavaScript is the main way to interface with it. You can use whatever you want, but I think they focus on JavaScript. The point of this, though, is it's unlike some other things. It's going to be an operating system, which is really really cool. So in other words, thinking in conversational ways to operate your refrigerator or your whatever it is they make. Obviously your phone, but everything that Samsung makes, they're going to put Bixby in. That's part of why they say they sold it. It's the idea of getting into everything. Really different approach. As a result, it's less conversational and a little bit more functional. So it can be as conversational as you need to be, but it doesn't start there. It starts with how you get things done and how you interface with the machine. We're looking to actually probably do an event with them this year. More on that later. So all the cloud players have voice chat solution, and they all have the same sort of limitation right now. And I think it's certainly Dialogflow is looking at doing another one. Everybody's kind of iterating pretty quickly in terms of how powerful these solutions are. I'm not trying to do a commercial for Dialogflow. It happens to be the thing that I chose. There are people building awesome things with all of these. To be honest, I've seen Watson the most probably because they're out in the world talking to people all the time. And obviously lots of people have built skills for Alexa. So I'm kind of motoring along here, guys. Any questions? As sort of a lead up. Yep.
How do you see the interoperability of all these voice, assistant?
Awesome question.
Because I feel like every time I build on something, I always want to publish everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating. I mean, I've seen Jovo software framework. Our company went through the same program as them in Europe, and others that kind of make it like interoperable. But I'm wondering your thoughts on that, given that context.
Yeah. Excellent. So a lot of them can publish to each other. I haven't done a lot of that. So later I'll show you in Dialogflow there's an integrations page, which is fun because there's one-click integrations with stuff, so you can just immediately do something, which is satisfies the 13-year-old. And they say they'll publish to Cortana and Alexa. I think those are the two that it says. I haven't tried that. I think that a lot of them will be somewhat intercompatible because they solve some of the key issues in very similar ways. There's an utterance that they call an intent. Everybody sort of does that. And in fact, the next slide, let me see. Yeah, I made a build. Why not, right? So that's actually a really good segue into what these are. I don't know that we need to see them all at once, but forgive the eye chart. I'll just talk you through. So the short answer is, on the assumption people have used a similar approach, you can port things back and forth. How much noodling you need to do after the fact, I can't speak to. My guess is they wouldn't have put it there if it wasn't somewhat useful. But I don't know. There isn't Lewis, there's Cortana, so I guess it's the same thing. There isn't Watson on there, and I don't know if that's because they're interoperable or because they, from a business perspective, didn't agree. I don't know. So I think that there's probably three pieces to your answers to answer the question. On the one hand is how have I architected the conversation? How have I scripted it? And a lot of that's like pseudocode before you even get it in. Then how are they implementing that? And as I say, I think Dialogflow did an okay job. I mean, they started off as a non-Google company. That may be why. And then the final piece is how does that get executed in real code? And I think the final piece, it probably not that interoperable. The middle piece, I think, like you can download in Dialogflow your agent just as a zip file, which says, okay, I've just made it into JSON, which means something can parse it and play with it. And that's probably what winds up happening. So I think if they're structurally similar, they find a way to do it, and if they're not, they're not. What I understand about Bixby, for example, is I don't think it would work. I think that their approach is significantly different. I can't speak to how give me a couple months and I'll tell you why, because it's really kind of new. So somewhat.